It's quite possible to see the whole of the East Midlands in about 3 minutes flat. Beneath the falling five lie the 5 shires of the region, and they're getting closer at the rate of 2 miles every minute. There must be an easier way of seeing the East Midlands.
This is the only way to travel. Throughout the summer, we've been zipping across the East Midlands, taking an unusual look at some familiar places, and at a few that may come as a surprise to you.
And from time to time, we'll be coming down to ground for a closer look at some unique regional events and activities. So, with pilot John Badham revving the rotors, let's start our bird's eye view of Five Counties High.
Approaching one of the region's top tourist attractions. Belvoir Castle, which has dominated this hilltop since medieval times. The names of chivalry, Sir Malcolm of Roxburgh, the Black Knight and his squire, Filth, all disguise members of the Nottingham Jousting Society, and they're about to ask for favours from the ladies. Oh dear, I don't like the look of this at all.
Have you got a bra on?
That's not really what you want.
There we are, there we are. There we are.
Black Knight trying to take the favour and not... And an excellent strike to Gloucester.
There's been a castle here for 900 years. For the last 500, it's belonged to the ancestors of Charles John Robert, 10th Duke of Rutland.
They love it.
Have you had a go yourself?
No, they're on your life.
Belvoir Castle may look authentically medieval. In fact, this building, the 4th on this spectacular site, was completed in the early 19th century. At one time, the lords of Belvoir Castle owned 30,000 acres of Leicestershire, much of it in the lush meadows of the Vale of Belvoir.
At the southern end of the Vale, the region's second largest city, Leicester, founded according to one legend by King Lear. Of the whole population of Leicestershire, more than half live here in the city, described in the 1930s as the most prosperous in Europe. It boasted then 100 different industries. Nowadays, light engineering takes pride of place, but the city will always be associated with one particular product.
For generations, Leicester has been urging the world to pull its socks up and reproaching those who chose their hose elsewhere. Recently, the fashion for exotic colours has brightened up the industry's prospects. This company alone offers a range of 93 different shades.
From the air, the city is surprisingly green. Leicester prides itself on more than 1,000 acres of public parks. And there's the city's clock tower, built in 1868. That date's correct. The ones on the clock itself, commemorating benefactors of the city, are all wrong.
One thing Leicester did get right was the railway revolution. The first line to be built in the Midlands in 1832 started there. This one, the Great Central, closed by the Beeching Plan, was reopened by enthusiasts a decade ago. It now makes a modest profit, which is more than the old Great Central ever did. And of course, it was from Leicester in 1841 that a young temperance worker organised the first ever railway excursion. At £1 a head, Thomas Cook squeezed 600 abstainers and a band into 9 open carriages and so founded the famous travel firm. The destination of those sober citizens, Loughborough, already a world centre for the casting of bells.
Loughborough's Caroline Tower was built as a memorial to the dead of the First World War and as a tribute to the town's world-famous bell foundries. The chime of bells, a dignified country house in its own parkland, a picture postcard image of traditional England. This is Stanford Hall in Leicestershire. With the River Avon flowing softly by and lines of noble trees, Stanford basks in the enduring peace of the English countryside.
Stanford Hall has played host to the International Hovercraft competition ever since the sport got underway in the early 1970s. It's still very much a minority sport, but with the price of the smallest craft now down to around £300, it could well be set for takeoff.
For one of the most landlocked regions in the country, the East Midlands enjoys an astonishing amount of sporting water. Over 3,000 acres here alone at Rutland Water. Only 6 years ago, this was woodland and farms. Since then, 27,000 million gallons of water have been poured over the submerged village of Netherhambleton. But if Rutland lost a village, it gained one of the finest recreation centres in the country. It could be Venice. In fact, it's the Church of Normanton, which just escaped the rising waters. When the water level is low, it's said it can look across to the spire of its sister church, emerging eerily from the waters.
Still more water. This time it's the North Sea, depositing 20 miles of sandy beaches and bringing the legendary air that's so bracing to Skegness, the East Midlands' most favoured seaside spot. From the small fishing village of just 100 years ago, Skegness has grown into a major tourist centre, entertaining almost 2 million visitors a year, many of them bringing their own accommodation. And here we are at Butlins. It was back in 1936 that Butlins Luxury Holiday Camp opened its doors to 500 campers. Now the camp can deal with more than 11,000. Billy Butlin's original slogan was a week's holiday for a week's wage, then an average £3.50. Thousands flocked to experience the novelty of an organised holiday, and the Butlin Empire expanded to some 50 camps at home and abroad.
Skegness, like so many other remote places, thrived during the railway age, with its opportunities for cheap travel. The railways prospered too. In order to cross the tiny river Welland, a small company like the Leicester and Swannington Railway could erect a viaduct 3/4 of a mile long, with 78, 79, 82 arches, the loftiest 70 feet high. For some reason, the East Midlands has always been closely involved in the development of transport, from the stagecoach onwards, and the railways were no exception. This is part of British Rail's vast research and development division at Derby, the most important locomotive centre in Britain. Employing over 900 people, British Rail's hopes of transforming a 19th century industry into one geared to the 21st are concentrated here.
Derby's name means place of the deer, though nowadays anything high-tailed and moving fast is likely to be just traffic on the city's new ring road. And there, from time to time, you'll catch sight of Derby's other great contribution to the art of moving in style. Charles Rolls and Henry Royce set up shop in Derby in 1908. Within a few years, their handcrafted models had slipped without effort to the front rank of quality cars. Nowadays, Rolls-Royce aero engines are the driving force behind its £1,500 million turnover, but somehow the name always conjures up a different picture.
After nearly 3/4 of a century of production, over 50% of all the Rolls ever made are still on the road. Satisfied customers have included Lawrence of Arabia, who declared that a Rolls in the desert was above rubies. A Rolls was quite useful in Derbyshire too, with beauty spots at a distance that didn't overtire the chauffeur. Beauty spots such as Dovedale. For a brief but beautiful 2 miles, the River Dove cleaves its way through a wooded limestone gorge. It was in the Dove's clear waters that Isaac Walton fished for trout, as earnestly as modern writers fish for words to describe the Dale's rugged beauty.
Most of this enchanted area is now charged to the care of the National Trust, but many wild acres of the Dales remain unprotected, some of them sheltering unexpected forms of life. It was George Stephenson, no less, who engineered the railway here to serve the mineral quarry at Critch. A century and a half later, his tracks have been commandeered by enthusiasts of the National Tramway Society.
She's got a ticket to ride. She's got a ticket to ride, but she don't care. She said that living with me was bringing her down.
Ancient trundlers rescued from wreckers' yards in New York, Glasgow, Prague, now rumble up and down the hillside, all with a common destination: nostalgia.
She's got a ticket to ride. She's got a ticket to ride. She's got a ticket to ride, but she don't care. I don't know why she's riding so high. Sure been quite sure to ride by me, before she gets saying goodbye. Sure think twice, sure do right by me.
A few miles north of the Tram Museum, the gaunt silhouette of Ryber Castle, a shell now, but once a sumptuous private house built on the profits of a health farm in the town of Matlock, hundreds of feet below. The noblest private house in England, it's been called, Chatsworth. On a gentle slope rising from the River Derwent, the first Duke of Devonshire in 1687 began building his magnificent home. The workmen didn't leave until 30 years later. The fourth Duke called in Capability Brown to landscape the park 10 miles round. Inside, the house is adorned with a fine collection of old masters and occasionally young mistresses.
We're in the state bedroom with the very bed in which King George II died in 1760. On show today, some of the eye-catching designs from a local firm, Janet Rager. Production at her factory nearby has been hit by the recession. But around the world, these glamorous creations from the First Lady of Lingerie still attract countless imitations.
The return of frilly knickers has helped get the wheels turning again in the Nottingham lace factories. These 80-year-old looms were brought out of retirement to meet the renewed demand for fine lace, as more and more people appreciate the delicate intricacy of the traditional designs. Nottingham's lace trade reached its peak around 1910, but fortunately for the city, as the old industry declined, new businesses were expanding.
Like Boots the chemist, Jesse Boot had opened his first shop in 1870. 60 years later, his benefactions to the city totaled more than £2 million, about half of that for the stylish university buildings and grounds. Down there is Nottingham Castle, familiar to billions of smokers around the world, ever since John Player chose it as the trademark for his branded cigarettes back in 1877.
Nottingham's Market Square. Its 5.5 acres used to be the largest in England. Then in 1929, the stately council house was erected, a token of the prosperity brought to the city by a chain of chemists, by cigarettes, and by cycles.
Today's sleek models are a far cry from the bicycles made in the workshop in Raleigh Street, Nottingham, where the company began almost 100 years ago. During that century, Raleigh has produced and acquired a wondrous range of bicycles, which it now entrusts to the National Cycle Museum at Belton House near Grantham.
Do you know what they asked the other day? Can you eat the wheat germ? It's heart of the wheat, I said. It's what makes your Vitby wheat germ taste so good. They thought that went out all through lunch.
Vitby wheat germ, and now high bran and malted wheat, the slice of life.
There is one telephone number that can get you a gas central heating expert to design your very own system. A team of highly trained fitters to
In this northwestern corner of Nottinghamshire, 5 different dukes carved out vast estates and built magnificent homes. Naturally enough, the area came to be known as the Dukeries. This is Thoresby Hall, hereditary home of the Dukes of Kingston. The Dukes of Newcastle were responsible for the fine layout of Clumber Park. It was the 5th Duke who planted the longest double avenue of lime trees in Europe, 2.5 miles long, an incomparable approach to... Well, unfortunately, Clumber House itself was demolished in 1938. Only the ground plan remains.
To the south of the Dukeries lies the most famous woodland in England, Sherwood Forest, and merging into the greenwood, Major Oak, by tradition the meeting place of Robin Hood and his merry men. As they robbed the rich, the merry men were unaware that beneath the greensward were hidden greater riches, vast reserves of high-quality coal. Already at the forest's edge at Nottingham, fortunes were being made from mining.
Woolerton Hall in Nottingham, built in 1588 by Sir Francis Willoughby, a local coal tycoon, with the profits from his pits nearby.
Today, more than 35,000 people are employed in the Nottinghamshire coal mines, and each year many of those 35,000 and their families gather in Mansfield for the Miners' Gala. The galas started back in 1949 and regularly attract the leading figures from the trade union movement and the Labour Party.
Despite the revolutionary sentiments of the Red Flag, the region's miners historically have been amongst the most moderate in the country. Comparatively rich and accessible seams of coal have helped, together with full mechanisation of the pits. The coal seams here lie at great depths. At Clipston Colliery near Mansfield, the shafts descend 2/3 of a mile, and above the ground, its 200-foot winding towers are the highest in the country.
The tailored lines of the power stations along the banks of the Trent disguise their colossal scale. Each of Burton's towers could comfortably swallow St. Paul's Cathedral. Enough power is produced at this one station to supply several cities the size of Lincoln. 1,000 tons of coal consumed every hour, 52 million gallons every hour of Trent water pumped around the cooling system and out through the towers. Within sight of Burton's massive towers, a gentler source of power. The windmill at North Leverton was built in 1813 and it's still in regular use. Local farmers much prefer the flour produced here to that ground out by modern mills.
Not far away, the town of Newark, once the personal property of Lady Godiva, although they never saw as much of her here as they did in Coventry. And Newark Castle, a once noble building, now a ruin, enjoying a fine view of the municipal lorry park. A succession of medieval kings stopped off here. King John stopped for good, dying here from a surfeit of lampreys in 1216. The castle's colourful history ended after the Civil War, when the Puritans shepherded in people from the countryside and ordered them to destroy it.
If that sounds a little depressing, then just fly north a few miles and drop in on the Newark and Nottinghamshire Show, the premier agricultural event in the East Midlands. Even if your own agricultural skills don't amount to more than a row of beans, you can still enjoy the splendid examples of fine breeding on show.
Well, you need to wallpaper the house anyway. Much of the region is rural, broad acres sustaining that most English of institutions, the country house. Stapleford Park in Leicestershire, the home of the Sherard family through 4 centuries. Crowning a high ridge on the Derbyshire border, the unblemished Elizabethan triumph of Hardwick Hall, more glass than wall. Spacious avenues of lime trees planted 250 years ago lead to Bowden House near Northampton, southern home of the Duke of Buccleuch.
We're flying over the city of Northampton, little sign from here of the natural resources that have kept the city prosperous for 1,000 years. The forests that provided the bark for tanning, and the flocks and herds that provided the leather for its most famous industry. Back in the 13th century, King John bought a pair of shoes in Northampton for 9p, and as far as we know, he didn't take them back to the manufacturers. Last year, the city produced 4 million pairs of shoes for 8 million feet. Despite intense competition from abroad, the traditional industry is likely to survive in Northampton.
Unlike neighbouring Corby, closure of the steel plants has dumped 5,000 people onto the labour market. Just a village in the 1930s, then a boomtown for 40 years, Corby faced the prospect in the 80s of becoming a ghost town. Then the energetic Newtown Commission got the town designated as the first enterprise zone in England, offering new industries unprecedented exemption from rates, from corporation tax, even from filling in forms for government statistics. Not surprisingly, new businesses have been flocking in.
Just over the hill at Rockingham Castle, times have been less troubled. The first fortress here was built at the command of William the Conqueror, and it was a favourite base for royal hunting parties. In 1530, the Watson family moved in and have lived there ever since. The castle can claim to be the oldest house in the region to have been continuously lived in, and also boasts a distinguished guest book. Charles Dickens was a frequent visitor, writing much of his novel Bleak House here.
Another famous visitor to the region, a composer, often stayed near the village of Church Langton in Leicestershire. In 1759, the music-loving rector organised a grand choral festival here at which the composer's best-loved work was given its first performance outside London. George Frederick Handel's The Messiah. The region abounds in fine churches. In Boston, the famous Stump, a navigation mark for mariners miles out to sea. Three centuries before Christ, Breeden Hill in Leicestershire was a fortified Iron Age settlement. 1,000 years later, the Saxons decorated their monastery here with some of the finest carvings to survive in England. The sun heated the lead on the spire, the wood supports beneath warped, and Chesterfield's famous landmark twisted nearly 8 feet out of True.
But perhaps the strangest religious building in the Five Counties is the triangular lodge at Rushton near Kettering. Built in 1597 for Sir Thomas Tresham, a devout Roman Catholic, the lodge symbolises the Holy Trinity. 3 sides, each 33 feet long, 3 stories, each with 3 windows. Even the inscriptions contain precisely 33 letters. Sir Thomas, as a Catholic, spent a total of 15 years in prison, yet still managed to design a series of buildings, all with a complicated religious symbolism. Lyvedon New Bield, for example, which represents the Passion of Christ, is constructed on elaborate mathematical principles connected with mystic numbers. When Sir Thomas was murdered in 1605, the building was left unfinished. He was never able to put it to its intended use as a place of retreat from the temptations of the world, the devil, and the flesh.
You were working as a waitress in a cocktail bar when I met you. I picked you out, I shook you up and turned you around, turned you into someone new. Now 5 years later on, you've got the world at your feet. Success has been so easy for you. But don't forget, it's me who put you where you are now. And I can...
The Zoom dance group sprang into existence when a Nottingham dance school was asked to choreograph a trendy fashion show. Now Zoom's horizons have expanded to cabaret, possibly even TV.
Don't you want me? You know I don't believe you when you say that you don't need me. It's much too late to find. If you think you change your mind, you better change it back or we will both be sorry. Don't you want me, baby? Don't you want me? Oh, don't you want me, baby? Don't you want me? Oh.
One of the earliest recorded revellers in the region was Robin Hood, who often came to Nottingham to listen to the minstrels play.
Woman, you want me, give me a sign, and catch my breathing even closer behind.
East Midlanders seem to be a gregarious lot. It's claimed that there are more nightclubs, discos and working men's clubs per head of population than anywhere else in the country.
Smell like a sound, I'm lost in a cloud, and I'm hungry like the world.
The fens of Lincolnshire. For centuries, engineers have struggled to drain the peatlands into ruler straight dikes. Again and again, the floodwaters have risen, most recently in 1947. Rising massively above the lowlands, the keep of Tattersall Castle, all that remains of Ralph Lord Cromwell's extravagant 15th century mansion. From the roof of the 100-foot tower, you can look across the fens to the finest Gothic building in Europe.
In the library of Lincoln Cathedral, you can still see the memo from William the Conqueror granting the first bishop permission to start building his majestic cathedral.
In Roman times, Lincoln was a busy inland port, served by the Foss Dyke, the oldest canal still navigable in England. Foss Dyke slices through the fens and then turns sharply to join the River Trent at the Roman settlement of Torksey. The Smug and Silver Trent, Shakespeare called it, although by the time it reaches Gainsborough, the river is showing some signs of its travel through the industrial heartland of England. 170 miles long, the Trent is reaching the end of its journey, and so are we. Each year, 7 million visitors come to the East Midlands, making tourism the region's third largest industry. We hope we've given you some idea why they come.
But for a last, fast look at the 5 counties, let's leave our helicopter and join a Provost jet from RAF Cranwell.